at that, and there's a lot of argument around how many people died during the Middle Passage of slavery. The lowest figure documented with some level of accuracy is 9 million. That's the lowest one. And we don't tie a yellow ribbon on for them. We don't ever acknowledge them. When do you remember us acknowledging them? When? And they punished Spielberg when he tried to acknowledge it. So we need to understand that these were millions of men, women, and children that perished in the trip over. Millions. And we don't ever acknowledge them. Doesn't that seem odd to you? How could that be? We've not forgotten. We have not forgotten. But they have been erased mysteriously from the pages of history. They've been erased.
In part 1 of Brought by Ships, it was established that the curse of Deuteronomy 28 and 68 is a curse upon all 12 tribes plus the tribe of Loe, aka Levi, collectively. The curse does not single out one tribe. The entire nation of Ya'osharal is targeted by this curse to be shipped across the sea into slavery, first as indentured servants and then later as permanent chattel slaves with no redeemer. The only incident in recorded history that matches the details of this curse is the Middle Passage from the 15th to the 19th century. Therefore, the only people who are the nation of Ya'osharal by blood are the people who descend from the survivors of the Middle Passage in the New World and their children scattered abroad. We prove this grammatically by parsing the text of Deuteronomy 28 and 68 word for word in its source language of Gabare, aka Hebrew.
Wahashivcha, Ya'o Matrem Ba'ane Oath, Badarch Ashar Amarte Lacha, La Taseit Goat Larathha, Wahaf Mahartham Sham, La Ebecha, Lagabadem Walashbachoth, Wa'ain Kana. And brought you Ya'o, Matzrain by ships, in the manner which I spoke to you. You will not any more again see it. And you sold yourselves there to your enemies, for male slaves and for female slaves, and there is no redeemer.
The curse targets a specific bloodline, regardless of how you look, what language you speak, how you dress, or what African tribe you live among as a slave. The great West African kingdoms did not sell the family members of their own tribes. They sold the strangers among them from the subclans and tribes who were their servile underclass. This is the part of black history where Pan-Africanists become agitated, because they have been pushing a false narrative that all black people are Africans, and that Europeans captured slaves as opposed to buying slaves that African kingdoms were selling. It's time to face facts.
Did Africans trade black people? Yes. Hell yes. And for those of us who are so sensitive and don't want to believe that, I mean, you just can't bring yourself to believe it because I don't know why. But, you know, we got these romantic ideas that, you know, black people were so dumb and stupid that they would just allow some white people to come all up into their camp and just take it over with, you know, just with ease and shit, just because they got guns. No, it didn't work like that. Them Peckerwoods could not come up in there without coming to see the head man, okay?
30 barrels, 2 kegs, and 11 flasks rum. And so it went. European slave traders found themselves bargaining with local African elite, who set the terms of trade.
Wa'al game yado goral wa yafano, hayalad bazona wa hayalada macharo bayen wa yashatho. And to my people have they cast lots, and have given the boy for a harlot, and the girl have they sold for wine, and they will drink. If you descend from a male survivor of the Middle Passage, this is who you really are. These prophecies, these curses are talking about you. You are not African, although you were shipped from Africa. You are not African American. You are not black. You are not Negro. You are not colored. You are not Afro-Cuban, or Afro-Mexican, or Afro-Puerto Rican, or Afro-Brazilian, or Jamaican, or Afro-Guatemalan, or Haitian, etc. Your ancestors were shipped to these places as slaves, but that is not who you are. You are Yaoshar'al. That is who you are. That is your real name, because you descend from a Middle Passage survivor. You are also not Igbo, or Asante, or Fulbe, or Fulani, or Yoruba, etc. Just because your ancestors once lived in those lands, spoke their languages, and practiced their religions, does not mean you are them. You are not them. You need to understand that the African nations assimilated their slaves, and this is no different than when slaves in America became English speakers and Protestant Christians, or when slaves in South America became Portuguese speakers and Roman Catholics. The slave population is always assimilated into the culture of the dominant society. The truth is that if you are OMPP, only Middle Passage people, then your ancestors were strangers from Asia and West Africa. They were strangers who trekked across the African continent from the Nile Valley, where the tribes of Yaoshar'al had settlements all along the Nile River from the delta to the border of Nubia. That is the truth, and here is the testimony of a contemporary eyewitness. Speaking specifically of the West African Guinea coast in the 17th century, 200 years before the end of slavery, John Ogilby visited the region and later wrote, and I quote, "Many Jews also are scattered over this region, some natives boasting themselves of Abraham's seed, inhabiting both sides of the river Niger. Others are Asian strangers who fled thither either from the desolation of Jerusalem by Vespasian, or from Judea wasted and depopulated by the Romans, Persians, Saracens, and Christians, or else such as came out of Europe whence they were banished, viz. Out of some parts of Italy in the year 1342, out of Spain in the year 1462, out of the Low Countries in 1350, out of France in 1403, out of England in 1422. These all differ in habit and are divided into several tribes, having no dominion, though both wealthy and numerous, but despised by all nations." End quote. It's a fascinating observation from one of Europe's elite, but before we discuss it in detail, we need to say one thing. We have to put aside the Eurocentric presumption that black people are not indigenous to Asia. They are, and Africa is only the motherland of humanity if you endorse the tenets of Darwinian evolutionary theory, which I unapologetically do not. The Torah is clear that the Fertile Crescent in Asia became the motherland of humanity after the Great Flood, near the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC, and mankind spread out from there to the rest of the world. The patriarch Abram was born and raised in northern Mesopotamia in 2001 BC, and we intend to argue that he is the founder of the Y-DNA haplogroup E on the human phylogenetic tree, and the father of all nations that belong to this haplogroup. What may seem controversial today was not controversial when John Ogilby visited West Africa in the 17th century, and that is that the true Jews, the ones with the bloodline, are the people of color who went through the bottleneck of the Middle Passage during the transatlantic slave trade. The true descendants of the biblical nation of Yaoshar'al are OMPP.
טוב מאוד, טוב מאוד. Go home. Bye bye. Good. Good job. איזה דבר. חרדים, חרדים, אחלה גברים שבעולם, לוקחים לחרדים. You are the real Jew. 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 You are the real Jew.
The true Jews, according to the Bible, you can check it in the Bible, you can read Job 30:30 and some other places. They have never been white. They have been people of color. And they have not stopped in Ethiopia. They were in Ethiopia, Sudan, and they have settled in West Africa. From West Africa, they have been taken